Today I interview Steve Bellinger. He is a award-winning science fiction author who published his first book at the age of 65. His award-winning first book was called The Chronicar, An Adventure in Time. We talk about his beginnings growing up on the west side of Chicago. We explore the power of storytelling, his thoughts on time travel, and how science fiction shapes our world. He also reflects on his time in radio drama, the evolution of technology, and we discussed the role of creativity. I had a great time speaking to Steve. He is inspiring, he is extremely creative, and we can learn a lesson from him that it's never too late to dream. Okay, Steve Bellinger, how do we know time travel hasn't already happened?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, I think time travel, as in my novel, or as in any time travel story where you hop into a device and you go into the future or go into the past like you're driving around in a Chevy, I don't think it's possible. And there was an experiment that Dr. Stephen Hawking did. He actually held a party, made it widely publicized to invite anybody from the future to come back and attend this party, and nobody did. Um, the time travel, if it were possible, is so dangerous. I just don't think it's possible. There's this whole thing about traveling faster than the speed of light, and then when I come back to Earth, you're 80 years old, but I'm still my age. But that's not time travel; it's time dilation. You have no control. I can't go back in time. I can only go forward. No, time travel, I don't think it's possible. I hope it's not possible.
Yeah, your book, the Chronicar, I read it, and it presents time travel in a way that I haven't seen presented by others, other movies, other books, and yours to me seemed plausible. It seemed that could be the actual physics, that could be the actual occurrence of time travel to the past.
Well, I use a trick that I learned from Isaac Asimov, and that's where when you write science fiction, if you start off with some real science and then morph into the fiction, sometimes people can't tell where that morph takes place. And at work, I had a young lady come to my office, close the door, and ask me, "Steve, is this real?" The idea is that I was able to make it that believable. I mean, that worked.
So you published that book when you were 65 years old, and that was your first book that you published. Is that correct?
It wasn't self-published. It was published by an independent publisher. That was my goal. I mean, my daughter brought home a book self-published by her friend once, and I couldn't get past page 3 for all of the grammatical and spelling errors. But if a publisher were to accept it and was willing to take the risk of the expense of producing it, that's when I thought, okay, I really got something. So they published it. It's won some awards, and it's gotten some incredible reviews. And it surprised the heck out of me because I didn't write a story. How can I put this? But it wasn't my intention to write a book, to write the next Star Wars, to write the next Time Machine. I wrote what I would like to read. I wrote the kind of book that I would enjoy. And luckily, other people enjoyed it too.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's more than just like a time travel story for me. I was actually moved by a lot of the scenes within the book, a lot of the situations that you created with your writing. I felt very nervous in a lot of the scenes. I could feel like I was almost part of the characters, if not the characters. And you can they're completely understandable the way you wrote it, the way you wrote those characters. The book won awards. I feel. I mean, I'm not a writer myself, but because of the science and the way the book made you feel, a lot of those very uncomfortable scenes in the book.
Yeah, that is interesting because it gets a lot of notoriety because of what you just said. But in my mind, first and foremost, it's science fiction. The other stuff is almost a subplot, in my mind. Um, I'm trying to promote the book for Black History Month, and I posted a very interesting review by a gentleman, how he read the book, and although he understood and had learned about the civil rights struggle. For the first time, he really understood it because the main character, Tony Carpenter, is a middle class young man from the suburbs who just happens to be black, and he was so taken by it that he was reduced to tears. I just thought that was amazing that it affected him that way. Had no idea that it would affect anybody that way. When the book was written, um, Red Summer Riot in Chicago in the year 1919, and at that point, no one had even heard of it. So a lot of people learned a little bit of history by reading my book. Now in 2019, they celebrated the 100th anniversary, and now it's all sort of common knowledge. But at that time, when I did the research, I was shocked to find out that in 1919, the bloodiest race riot in the city's history.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was surprised by that too when I looked up research online after I read some articles about it, and I've never heard of them. And I hear they were some of the largest at the time. They were just incredibly impactful.
And again, that's another compliment to me when someone reads my book and they're curious enough to go look something up to see if it's real or not. There's a little of that in virtually every novel I've written where I've had people go back and say, wait a minute, is that real? Did he make it up? And they're surprised to find out how much of it is real.
I heard a podcast with you, and you were 73 at the time, and then 74, and then you were pre-retirement on that podcast, but now I guess you're fully retired.
I'm fully retired. I'll be 75 later this year, and I'm sort of enjoying it. I do part-time work now. I'm a cyber navigator at the Chicago Public Library. So instead of being a software instructor, computer technician, and all this other stuff, I just help people with the computer when they have a question when they come into the library, and that's a lot of fun.
So you go to the library, and someone's on the computer, and you'll help them out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually stationed there for 4 hours a day. They come in, and if they have questions, I can go over and help them fill out a form, apply for a job, write a resume or whatever it is they need to know.
How long have you been doing that now?
Oh, just not even a year. Because I thought it was going to be a volunteer thing, but it is an actual job. So it's nice, a little bit of income. And I've been doing it for about 6 months or so. And I like it because I get a kick out of the light in people's eyes when they realize, oh, that's how it works. I have the patience and the preference to work with beginners. A lot of the trainers that I know hate working with beginners. I don't have any problem with that because I think everybody should know how to do it. And apparently, I have a technique for doing so. And people are very happy with how patient I am with them because I know it takes a while to understand these things. And they walk out happy because they have their resume or their job application or their, you know, whatever the thing is they're trying to do.
I feel like you may be someone that has a lot of patience. That's let me ask you this.
Sure.
What got you into writing? So I read that your mom would bring home books, and go ahead and walk me through that if you don't mind.
I'm the son of a single mom, and she worked at a printing company, and she would sneak off books and magazines that were hot off the press, and sometimes they were novels. She was a voracious reader herself. Now she tended to read some of the racier things, Mickey Spillane and some of the more adult stuff that we were not supposed to see. But she also brought home things like Isaac Asimov's science fiction novels. In fact, she brought home I, Robot one day, and I picked it up and completely fell in love with it. Um, she would also bring home magazines like Jet and Ebony. So we were very versed on what was happening in the world. She encouraged us to read and to be knowledgeable of what's going on. And I think to this day, a lot of what we are is from what she instilled in us. And I guess I don't know where it came from, but I always had the streak to want to create. When I watched TV, I was enamored with news announcers, and I wanted to be one. There was a very famous weatherman in Chicago. His name was P.J. Hawk. Fell in love with this guy. I wanted to be a weatherman. So now I'm reading books. Well, I want to write stuff. And when I was a kid, I wrote a lot of things that nobody ever saw but me. And the real kicker was I used to create little comic books, you know, superheroes and things of that nature. And when I was done, I would look and I had this completed booklet. I take a 8.5 by 11 sheet, fold it over, staple it in the middle, and then draw on the pages. And it was just amazing that I created this, even if no one else ever saw it. So um, then something interesting happened when I got into high school and college. I discovered that any class that I took where a term paper was a major part of the grade was almost a guaranteed A or B. So apparently I had some sort of a natural tendency towards writing. And that's what got me through school.
So your mom brings home these books, a variety of books. You, I guess, you. It sounds like you fell in love with the science fiction ones that you ran into. How long were you reading these books before you started getting the interest in writing? Do you think?
I was probably 12 years old when I remember reading the first Isaac Asimov novel. So I mean, it was probably a few years after that before I knew how to write. But I seem to remember maybe around 15 years of age writing um, stories and things. I was very big into James Bond, the original James Bond, Sean Connery when it came out, and I had my own little series of spy novels that I would write. I would get these wire-bound binders, you get for school, and I would fill the thing up with my little novels and stories. Again, no one's ever read it but me, and I'd kill if I could find one day, sitting somewhere. And they were kind of clever, I thought, but I got it out of my system, and then I would put it away and then pick it up 6 months later and read it as if I'd never seen it before. It was my way of being creative. And one thing, because we were from very, very humble beginnings. And I think as a result, I was kidding around with a friend of mine. When you don't have a lot of the advantages, you find a way to do what you want to do. I couldn't get published, but I wrote anyway. And over the years, I mean, I've written everything from newspaper articles for the village I lived in back in the 90s to actual Sunday school lessons for the AME church. And because I wanted to write, and once I found something that I could write that other people could benefit from, or I went completely nuts. All of a sudden, I've got an audience. And writing the first book completely blew my mind, the response that it got.
Yeah, the Chronicar. Yeah, you. I think I read you researched for a few years before writing that book.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I researched in the library. The internet was still pretty young, but I wanted to get the real deal. I mean, I went to the library and looked up microfilm copies of actual newspaper articles so that I could get not what someone else interpreted, but what actually happened, at least based on newspaper articles. You couldn't necessarily believe those either. But I did a lot of research. A couple of years I was in the library doing a research on the history and on the science. Some of the science I already knew, but I had to do some research to figure out how to blend it in there. And so there was a lot of work that went into that novel.
You grow up on the west side of Chicago. You get into books. You go to high school, and then what? How were you in high school? What were your interests in high school? What would walk me through those years if you don't mind?
Well, that's a very funny story. In high school, I was an honor student, and again, this is the 1960s when there was a push to try to get minorities into the flow of things. Now, my interest was always writing and media. I wanted to make movies, TV shows. I wanted to write radio dramas. I wanted to write novels. But I was good in math and science. So I sort of let them push me into technology and science. So I had the grades and everything, and I was able to get the scholarships. And so I was accepted into IIT, the Illinois Institute of Technology. The problem was the school that I went to in the city was an inner city school, and the schools in the black communities weren't as well equipped as in other parts of the city. So I left there thinking that I was smarter than I was. And I got into IIT and almost flunked out because I was going to major in physics and realized that I was not prepared for that. So I went looking for another major, stumbled upon psychology. In fact, what happened there is that I wrote a paper and the instructor was completely blown away by it. I got an A plus plus plus. And I thought, this is my thing. So I actually have a degree in psychology. How I got into computers is another story. Because they did have I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of a mainframe computer. Um, if you've ever seen the movie Hidden Figures, there is a scene where they finally install this big IBM machine that fills the entire room. Well, that's the first computer that I wrote code for because they had one of those at IIT, and that was no fun. It wasn't until PCs came out in the 90s that I got back into computers. But I was always into writing and into media. If I couldn't get a job at a radio station, if I couldn't get a job doing radio drama, I decided I was going to do it on my own. In fact, I built my own my own recording studio in my apartment to produce radio drama. And that's what I was getting to. When you don't have the resources, you find a way to do it. I mean, this recording studio was all used equipment. One of the real decks that I used, I found in the trash and repaired. But you cannot tell
Mm.
by listening to the recordings. And when people find out what I use to produce these things, they're usually pretty shocked. We used to edit audio tape using razor blades and splicing tape. I mean, it's hard to believe, as everybody now uses the digital stuff, and it was just so much fun.
Sounds like that was some cutting edge, for the time. I mean, we're still cutting edge now. It seems for so many years things are changing so quickly.
Sure, I I think nowadays, and again, not to knock the creativity of people, but I think it's almost too easy now. Like I
Hmm.
said, I used to there's a scene in one of my radio dramas where I have two people talking to each other who had never met. And it's only because I was able to splice this piece of the conversation into that, and it took hours to get it right. Well, now digitally, you can have the voice synthesized by an AI. I mean, the level of creativity has gone almost out of the window because it is almost too easy to create things. And again, I know it takes skill to do those things, and I don't knock anyone who uses these tools. It's just that I just feel like it's cheating.
Yeah, are you worried about? I know you've written. Is it five books now? Is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
what you're
yeah,
up to now?
yeah. I'm up to
Yeah.
five now, and I'm working on my wife's second book. She is a business coach, and this would be a nonfiction thing. And I'm also working on some screenplays. I've written a screenplay for the Chronicar that um, came in like third place in a couple of competitions, and I'm working on another screenplay now for my newest novel. And again, they go out there. It takes a long time for people to find them and to discover them and everything, but just being out there is important to me. Just having, if one person reads my book and enjoys it, then I'm happy. Okay, I wouldn't argue with 500,000 more, but but the idea is that I did it for hopefully the enjoyment and maybe edification of people.
Well, I can say I really enjoyed that book, and I've told several people about it. So,
Well, thank you.
so you go to college, IIT. You study psychology. Didn't you have a radio station while, or like a radio show while you were there?
Yeah, IIT had a campus radio station. It was very interesting because in the beginning, it was AM carrier current, meant that the signal was transmitted through the electrical system of the campus. So you had to have a radio that either plugged into the wall or was very near an outlet to even listen to the program. And I actually have a recording of the very first program I ever did. It's sitting in the other room, and and it was fun. I mean, I sounded very amateurish in the beginning, but then as it went on, they finally went FM with sort of a limited range, and my skills improved, and I ultimately ended up having the most popular program on the air. I was the pioneer. I was the one who would have, the recording studio that I told you about actually started in my dorm room. I didn't have a lot of stuff, but I had a couple of tape decks and a mixer. And I would create my own little stingers and introductions and things like that. And then I would go back and use it on the air. And, the other guys would emulate it, copy it. It became sort of a standard. But when I was a senior, I actually won Announcer of the Year because I had the most popular program on the air. Um, One of the things that I did that was different, I mean, there weren't a lot of black students at IIT, so I was probably the only announcer that played that variety of music. But again, I would also play what the listener wanted to hear. Most of the students, when they would get on the air, it was like their own personal jukebox. If they liked the Beatles, they would play the Beatles. If they liked Aretha Franklin, they would play that. I'm in the middle of playing a lot of soul music, and this guy calls up and asks for a song from Camelot, Richard Burton, and I played it because he's listening. You know, and I think that surprised a bunch of people, but no, the whole idea is that I'm there to entertain my audience. So I wasn't afraid to do it. I mean, I did classical programs, I did all comedy programs. I wasn't afraid to do something different. And as a result, people enjoyed the things that I did. I are you familiar with the rock opera Jesus Christ Superstar?
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yes. Hmm.
Okay, well, for those of you who know it, there is a theme song entitled Jesus Christ Superstar with sort of angelic sounding singers and with a sort of a rock beat. Well, I did a little thing. I knew I got some gospel singers that I knew, and and I did my own version called Stevie B Superstar, and that was my radio theme. And you can hear that on my website. I'll tell you about that, how to get to it. I'm actually
Hmm.
very proud of that.
So did your show had a did it have a name? Did you name it?
Well, every year was a different name. I mean, um, the last show was called Steve's Get Together. Before that, it was
Hmm.
called Stereophonic Soul. I mean, every year I had to make it cooler and cooler. And but Steve's Get Together was probably the most popular program because it had all of the fancy stuff. I had the young ladies come in and do announcements for me. I would do little comedy bits and just have a great time with it. And that was the thing that really gave me the bite for doing radio. And that's what led to doing radio drama later on.
So you did that show after your fourth year in college. Did it end and then you get into radio again, or what happened after you finished
Well,
college?
well, I finished college, but they let me do a program for another year because it was so popular. And then when I went out and got my first job, which was working at a halfway house, I slowly built up this radio studio or this recording studio that I told you about. Um, um, Really, the story began when I was a freshman. I was listening to the 30th anniversary recording of Orson Welles' War of the Worlds. This was the program back in 1938 that was it was the story of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, where the Martians land on Earth and try to invade. And Orson Welles did he did a very unusual version of it. He did it as if they were a news broadcast and news bulletins, and it was so realistic that people freaked out. People thought that the Martians had landed. And they even changed, the FCC actually changed some of the rules of broadcasting to prevent that from happening again. Anyway, I'm listening to The War of the Worlds, 1938, as a freshman, and this is in 1968, and it completely blew me away, scared the hell out of me. And I got this thought, what would this be like if it were modernized? How would it sound if it were done in modern times? And I decided at that point that I was going to produce a modern version of War of the Worlds. So I built a studio. I did a lot of other radio drama, sort of cutting my teeth and honing my skills. And then exactly 10 years later, on the 40th anniversary of the original War of the Worlds, I aired on a network of college radio stations a program called The Day of the Martians, which is a story where the Martians land in Elgin, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. And I have a scene where they're attacking Michigan Avenue. I've got a guy on top of the Hancock Center watching the Martians approach. And I've been told that it is better than the original. I consider it to this day to be my magnum opus. I am extremely proud of that program. It can be heard now on the Mutual Audio Network and on my website.
What challenges did you face when you were producing it? When you were producing it, what challenges did you face?
Um, well, I mean, just doing it. I mean, I had to write the entire script and I had to find the actors. I mean, I had actually auditioned people to do other radio dramas. And from that group, I was able to choose the people who were in this and creating the special effects because you could get records with special effects on them, but they're all copyrighted. So I had to create my own special effects. There is a scene where the um, the Martians have landed, and there is a crowd of people at this field in Elgin, and you can hear all of the people in the background while the announcer is saying, "Look at this, look at that," and what nobody realizes is that the sound of the people in the background is from Chinese New Year, 1975. Half of the people are speaking Chinese, but you're so focused on the story you don't realize that. Because I had a portable tape recorder and I would record my own special effects. I did a um, I did a radio play entitled Rapid Transit, where I record these guys where they're on the subway train, and the stories about all of the weirdos that they meet getting on and off of these stations. And the special effects for that was my sitting on a train one day, holding the mic and literally recording every stop, and then timing the story to to the stops and everything. And stuff was a lot of fun. The only problem is that a lot of the things that I've done are totally lost now. The humor is just too old. People don't get it. I did I did a detective series. And one of the detective stories is entitled Murder on the Evanston Express. No one gets that now because even if you remember Agatha Christie, no one remembers that Chicago had a train called the Evanston Express. So it's all very dated. Only people of my generation would get a lot of the humor. But it is out there. If anybody wants to hear it, they're welcome to it.
I hear you're a Star Trek fan. You're a big Star Trek fan. Is that
I'm a
correct? Can you
well,
tell me where that came from?
I am a rabid Star Trek fan, but I'm also a very picky one. That came from again, my love for science fiction. It's 1966. I'm in high school, and this science fiction program, Star Trek, comes on, and I just completely fall in love with it. Um, and so much so that there was a time when people would make fun of you if you were too much into things. But in the 1990s, I was a member of a science fiction club. We had a meeting, and this lady who was older than I walked in wearing a full Starfleet uniform. At that point, I was hooked. I had uniforms. I'm going to conventions and everything else. Um, but I'm very picky with Star Trek. We were watching last night this movie, Star Trek Section 31 or whatever, and it was bogus. It wasn't Star Trek. It was just another, shoot 'em up fight and, you know, destroy this and destroy that. Star Trek, the thing that grasped my attention is that it was the only science fiction that I had seen that envisioned a positive future, a future where we're exploring, a future where the world has not been destroyed or it survived that, and now we're out there trying to meet other alien races. On the bridge of the ship, you have a black woman in a command role, on the communications. You have an Asian man here, a Russian gentleman here, and an alien over there. But then over the years, Star Trek has evolved from that. Deep Space Nine, where you have Avery Brooks as the captain of as a Starfleet captain. In Star Trek Voyager, you have a woman as the captain. This is what Star Trek is all about. It's about a future where who you are, what you are, and your background means nothing. If you are qualified, you can do that. There have been episodes of Star Trek with the most bizarre looking aliens, but they're Starfleet captains because they're capable.
You have some thoughts about science fiction. What's considered science fiction, and what you don't consider?
Now that's very interesting. The term science fiction was invented by a guy named Hugo Greenberg back in the 20s. He was a publisher who published a lot of science fiction, and he created that term. And I got it written down. He actually defined science fiction himself as a form of fiction that deals principally with the impact of actual or imagined science upon society or individuals. My version of that is that in science fiction, the science, whether real or imaginary, has to be so central to the story that without it, the story would fall apart. Now, by that definition, Star Wars is not science fiction. Star Wars is about rebels fighting an evil empire. You can give metal swords and wooden ships and tell the same story. Not that it isn't great, not that it isn't exciting. And for those Star Wars fans whose heads are exploding right now, it's not a put down. I'm only saying that is um, not the proper category. All of this came from a friend of mine read the Chronicar. Well, he bought a copy just to support me. And then, one day on the train, he pulled it out of his bag and started reading and was totally shocked how much he enjoyed it. Because as he told me, I hate science fiction. And that sort of confused me for a while until I realized that most people don't know what science fiction is. Maybe he hates Star Wars. Maybe he hates, monsters and things like that. But science fiction is not necessarily, you know, intergalactic battles and googly-eyed monsters. It can be, but it isn't necessarily. I mean, there is science fiction that takes place on this planet. There have been movies like Contagion, which talks about, a pandemic and how they deal with it. Well, that's science fiction. In fact, it turned into science fact a few years ago. So science fiction isn't necessarily outer space, which is what a lot of people get confused on. They think that science fiction is anything that is outer space, that is weird, that is strange. Most superhero movies aren't science fiction. My favorite superhero has been and always will be Superman, but there is no way you can scientifically explain any of his powers, not even if you made up the science. But that's not what it's about. I don't watch Superman looking for scientific accuracy. I want to see him kick the butt of the bad guys.
So you've given a lot of thought to all of this. If you could live in any fictional universe besides Star Trek, which would you choose and
There,
why?
there isn't anything other than Star Trek. There is no other universe I would want to live in. Only again because Star Trek, in the beginning, and the first two or three series, it's a universe where people respect each other based on their abilities and not on where they come from. You know, um, it was a place where I can't imagine any other universe, as you say, that I would want to live in. A very weird thing. When I was writing the Chronicar, in fact, this actually came up in the follow-up book. It's entitled "Time Waits for No One," and the young man is going back in time, and in fact, in one scene, he goes back to the 1950s, and he's not prepared for the level of racism that he experiences then. Then he goes back and meets another older man, a scientist, and he's wondering, what time can I go to? And he says there is no time that was good for a black person, which is I don't know where that came from, but that's a very frightening and real thought. And when I think of another universe that I would want to be in, I can only think of the Star Trek universe, where your race, your gender, your origin, whether human or alien, makes no difference. If you have the skills, if you have the ability, if you qualify, you can be a starship captain. You can be an admiral. I thought it was always interesting in the first Star Trek movies that Admiral Cartwright, Captain Kirk's boss, was always a black man. When the original actor who played that part died, they made a point to replace him with another black actor. I think they were trying to make a point.
Mm.
And now when you watch some of the Star Trek movies, the guy who's in charge of the president of the Federation is an alien from another planet because they're part of the Federation. Why can't he? Why does everything have to be human? Which is another very interesting thing that Star Trek addresses. There is in one Star Trek movie, um, they're dealing with the Klingons, trying to make peace with them, and I think Kirk makes a comment that he thinks is a compliment, complimenting their humanity, and the Klingons are insulted. The very
Hmm.
racist statement to make. We're not humans. I mean, it
Hmm.
teaches very interesting lessons. We could talk about Star Trek for hours. but I wouldn't want to bore your audience because most of the people don't get into it that deeply.
Yeah,
And
I had a
I,
friend of mine. I had a friend of mine that I went to college with, and he wanted to go see one of the new Star Trek releases. And we show up, and I've known him for years, and he
Mhm.
shows up wearing, I
Oh yeah.
guess it was a captain's uniform.
Hmm.
And there were other people at the theater with that, so I know that the fan base is very intense. They're very dedicated.
Oh yeah, I would love to one day when I've got $5,000 go on the Star Trek cruise where they have a lot of the actors there. I have a whole collection of autographed pictures from the stars of Star Trek, the older series, and I got a kick out of it. And it was just a lot of fun. I'm also very much into Doctor Who, which, believe it or not, I consider to be more science fiction than a lot of other things. I mean, if I were to give you a list of the things that I really enjoy watching, you'd probably be shocked.
Like, what do you like watching?
Well,
What do you
well,
like? I know Star Trek, Doctor Who.
well, there's a lot of British stuff. There's a British series, which is actually a science fiction comedy series called Red Dwarf. It is funny as hell, but it also has some of the best science fiction. It is an absolutely crazy thing. My wife and I are big fans of British comedy, Monty Python, and yeah, I don't know if you ever heard of Faulty Towers, which is a series that John Cleese did, and it's just that our tastes tend to be different because American comedy, especially nowadays, is not funny. It's
Mm.
predictable. It's not funny. You know, they will try to bring things back. I was a big fan of the original Odd Couple. The Odd Couple is one of my favorite plays, and the TV show is one of my favorite TV shows. They tried to bring it back. I don't know why, and it was totally unfunny. I'm the only person I know who just totally did not like Seinfeld, and I'm probably risking my life saying that on online here, but it's a matter of taste, and I just never found him to be funny.
Yeah, I'm a huge Seinfeld fan. I can sit
Yeah,
down and watch a Seinfeld episode multiple times, and I'm still entertained each time I watch it.
and that's the essence of it. This is getting back even to the Star Trek, Star Wars thing. It is what you like. If I tell someone that I'm not a Star Wars fan, that's not going to affect the franchise in any way, and it's not insulting the taste of someone who does enjoy Star Wars. It's just not my thing. And you love Seinfeld. I hope you can enjoy every episode that's on there. I just don't think we'll be watching TV together. That's all. Have you ever seen 2001: A Space Odyssey?
Yes, yes, I have.
Okay,
Yeah.
that is my all-time favorite movie. I've probably seen it 50 times. I usually make a point to watch it at least once a year on my Blu-ray. And every time I watch it, I learn something new. That is the greatest science fiction film ever made, as far as I'm concerned. Many people think it is boring. Many people don't understand it, but I love it. I went to see it first run in the theater. I took a date, a young lady I was trying to date, and she was lost after the credits. As soon as the ape showed up, she was totally, lost what was going on. But it is the most realistic science fiction movie ever made.
Yeah, I remember that movie. The well, with AI, right? I mean, the computer somewhat takes over the ship, if I recall correctly, and locks him out.
Well, yeah, the computer is supposedly, which is another whole issue, is supposedly sentient, and he has a psychological breakdown. I would suggest to you that even Hal was only imitating human intelligence.
Hmm.
I don't think machine intelligence as our intelligence is possible. But the reality is, if it stimulates it well enough, we can't tell.
Hmm.
And Hal responded to being lied to, and so he did some bizarre things, which kind of underscores my general, I don't want to say distrust, but discomfort with modern technology and how quickly we accept it. Um, tell you a funny story. I wrote a novel about an AI sort of thriller novel, and in doing the research for that, I learned that back in the 1980s, we had this fancy computerized system for detecting Russian missiles coming over to the United States, and it's always
Hmm.
scanning skies. And one night, the Secretary of State gets a phone call saying that the system is reporting that there are 1,200 Soviet missiles on the way, and they're going to be here in half an hour. That guy says, can you please confirm that for me? Okay, they go back, calls back 10 minutes later. No, it's more like 12,000 missiles are on the way. So this guy is thinking, do I call the president? Do I even wake up my wife? She's going to be dead in 15 minutes. Then they call back and say, oh, false alarm. It was a 45-cent chip had gone bad, and as a result was reporting the wrong thing. We forget that a machine, like a human, the tiniest malfunctioning piece can have devastating results.
Hmm.
So I'm a little, it'll be a while before I can get into a self-driving car and totally trust it.
Yeah, the future's changing pretty quick. Yeah, I have there's like a lot of vehicles like the Tesla, and I've been in one and put it on self driving, and it's kind of scary. It feels like a 15-year-old is driving behind the wheel, and
Mm-hmm.
that's always uncomfortable. You know, that is it's it was kind of worrisome for me.
It took me years to get used to cruise control. Okay.
So you've written short stories, novels, fan fiction, some radio drama.
Mm-hmm.
Which give you the most creative fulfillment, and why?
Whatever I'm writing at the moment. Um, I, 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 I haven't written any in a long time, but I used to write fan fiction when when I had writer's block for other things. Fan fiction, for those of you who don't know, fan fiction is where you write your own Star Trek stories, you write your own Star Wars stories. And the thing about fan fiction is that you don't have to worry about character development. You don't have to build a universe, it's already there. You're just writing a story. And the beauty of it is that you can do what they call crossovers. You can mix them. There is a series called Highlander. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's about
Highlander.
a race of beings that are immortal. They can live forever. So why not put the Highlander in the Star Trek universe? Okay, and if you're familiar with Highlander, you'll love the title of my story, which was Where No Clan Has Gone Before. Okay, and then I had some great fun because I'm a big fan of cartoons and animation. And you ever heard of the series Pinky and the Brain?
Pinky in the Brain, yes. Hmm.
Well, I have. There is a fan fiction story entitled Brainstorm, where Pinky and the Brain take over the Enterprise, and people loved it because it's a mixture of the two universes, and it sort of makes sense. And it was fun to write. It was, probably my all-time favorite is one called. Well, it involves Doctor Who and Star Trek. In fact, the very first famous fan fiction, was a Doctor Who Star Trek crossover with the Tom Baker Doctor Who on the Captain Kirk Enterprise. That was written back in the 80s or 70s or whatever. That's where fan fiction actually got started.
Were there other writers and thinkers in your family, or do you think you played or you paved your own path?
Well, I was sort of the different one. I was the oddball. I was the first in my family, in fact, even in my extended family that I know of, to go to college. Um, I mean, people went to technical schools and they went beyond high school, but I was the first, I'm pretty sure, to go to college. And I was the one who wanted to do the different things. We were always taught that, my grandfather, who is, from a much earlier generation, wanted me to be a baseball player because in his mind, that was the only way a black man could ever, achieve anything because that was his experience. Problem was I was a klutz. I couldn't play sports and that really bothered him. But I think in the end, when he saw what I had achieved, he was still proud of me.
So you graduate
Mm-hmm,
college,
mm-hmm.
right? So and then at 65 you publish your first book, but it sounds like you've been writing uh been writing most of your life. It seems like what happened in those years? Kind of give me kind of walk me through that.
Well, I had always wanted to write the great American science fiction novel, and I tried several times. Um, there is a, there is a, it's not even an early version of the Chronicar, but a story that inspired the Chronicar, put it that way, that I tried to write years ago, and I even sent the thing off and got insulting, rejection notices because it's kind of a closed group. they're looking for Stephen King, who is already making money, and they're not really interested in some new guy who's writing something that is not what everybody is reading, if you follow me. So so I wrote this stuff, but again, I wrote. I lived in a little town called University Park for a while. We were raising our daughter, and I wrote for the newspaper there. Um, for the churches that I attend, I wrote skits and plays for the Sunday school that was actually then put into a database and shared with other churches. And I was getting letters from other pastors saying how great that, how much they enjoyed it. I think I mentioned that that I wrote the Sunday school text for the AME church that was used globally. And it's interesting because they liked it because, well, I taught Sunday school for a while, and I used to teach the junior high. And no one else wanted to teach the junior high because, teaching anything religious to little kids is very easy. But when you get to the junior high, they start asking the difficult questions. And no one wanted to teach junior. Well, I was glad to do it. And I, the one copy of that little booklet for the AME church that I still kept is one where I compared Jesus Christ to Batman. And the kids related to that. They could understand that because it was something that was at the time, very popular. So I like doing things differently. I like trying to be cutting edge. And I wrote a short story that my first publication was a short story that I wrote entitled A Silly Millimeter about a guy who was fighting with City Hall because his house was a millimeter too big, and he was being fined every day for it. Um, and that story you can actually hear because it's now part of a series that I do called Once Told, where other people read my stories with sound effects and music, and have a great time. That's one of the neat things about the internet. But one of the episodes of Once Told is actually a story written by a Japanese woman. Well, a Japanese American, a black woman who married a Japanese man and moved to Japan. And she wrote this great story that was read by a young woman who lives in London, none of whom I've ever met in person. They're all over the internet. And and it's one of the neatest things.
So you get these people from all over the world that will read your stories, and then they're published online or released
they're
online.
on my website, and they're also on the Mutual Audio Network, which is a podcast of independently created audio programs, dramas and comedies and skits and whatever. And you can hear it again on my website or on Mutual Audio. And not all of them are international. Some of them are actually done here, in Chicago. I just had different people read different things for me, and it was my attempt to. I'm very much of a showman. You know, um, I spent more time developing the intro and the exit with the music and the dramatic reading than anything else. And it's been compared to Twilight Zone. People really seem to like it. I mean, I went online and I paid money for the music that's being used, and I'm very proud of it.
It sounds to me like I mean, you're 74 now, right?
You keep reminding me of
And
that.
you have this. Well, it amazes me because to me, I'm gathering that you have all this energy, you have all this drive, you have this. It's like you're not afraid to try things new, and you're excited about the future. And I feel like perhaps you've been like that most of your life.
Well, yeah.
Am I wrong
No,
there?
you're exactly right. I mean, I'm still a kid at heart. Okay, I watch cartoons on TV, classic cartoons all the time. Um, I won't. I'm. My wife got me for my birthday the complete set of the Three Stooges. I love that stuff, and I don't think I'll ever grow up. And the difference between me and a lot of other people is that to. Um, I'm not afraid to let my inner child out. I remember one day I was on the bus heading towards a Star Trek convention, and I'm wearing my Starfleet uniform. And this guy sitting across from me gives me the strangest look. Like, you idiot, what are you doing? Of course, he's wearing a hat with Donald Duck on it. So I mean, but it got to the point where I don't care what he thinks. This is me, and this is what I want to do. This expresses what I believe in and what I really enjoy. People walk around now with holes ripped in their jeans. Well, that's their expression. I don't get that. If I want to wear a full Starfleet captain's uniform and walk down the street, well, you can admire it or ignore it. And I think as I've gotten older, I care less and less about what other people think. You know, this is what I like to do, and if I'm not, if I'm not physically bothering you, then either you can look at it, you can laugh, or you can enjoy it, or ask me where I got it. I well, the last Halloween before I retired, I came to work wearing a full Starfleet uniform, and people absolutely loved it.
What age do you think you started being like that, and why do you think you're like
I,
that?
I think as long as I can remember, you know, I there's this thing about, um, most people are consumers. They watch TV, they read books, they observe the world. I'd like to produce, and I've always wanted to create my own, even when it was amateurish. Back when I was a kid, we lived near the world famous Metro Street Market, the world's biggest flea market. And one day my brother came home with his beat up tape recorder. And we started using that to do skits and things. That's where the radio drama started. You're familiar with Alvin and the Chipmunks, that whole thing. And well, I figured out how he did that and did my own thing with that. I was always trying to do something. I was always trying to be creative and to create my own thing. And I've always been that way. And and it always amazes me how other people, they look at it and they admire it. And I tell them it's not that hard, but they'd rather sit and watch what I do than to do it themselves.
Yeah, I have some kids, and they're kind of that age, teenage, where they really care a lot about what others think of
Mm-hmm.
them. They don't want to embarrass themselves. It's very, I mean, it's quite it, but they have some friends that aren't like that, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and that to me it's inspiring to me when I see kids that are
Well,
like
I was
that.
sort of that way in high school. I kind of hid my the fact that I was an honor student and that I like to write stuff. And I would read the story to class and they'd laugh at it because they didn't get it. And by the time I got into college, I realized as I started meeting other people who were the way I wanted to be. That is, this is what I do, and I don't care if you like it or not. And I realized that I could be the same way, and that is the way that I am now. Everyone tells me, Steve, if you want to make money, write a Star Wars movie. No, I want to write this. I want to write something that has some meat to it and some thought to it. I mean, my latest book is probably the most frivolous thing I ever did. It's a disaster movie kind of a thing, and it's a lot of fun, and I enjoyed writing it. But everything else tends to be a little deeper, you know.
What impact do you think your writing has had on your relationships in your life?
Oh well, my family, they're always, your family loves all the stuff you do. But I've had a couple of things that sort of impacted me. My wife, my second wife, when she read the first draft of the Chronicar, she threatened to divorce me if I didn't submit it somewhere. So that was encouragement, and I was proud to have her with me when I went to Miami to pick up one of the awards. It was great. I mean, she was there and supported me all the way. I have a niece who, I think she was in junior high at the time, and she had the class assignment was to write about someone that you knew that had done something great, and she chose her author, Uncle Steve, and that brought me to tears. So to be, and I had no idea that she had paid that much attention to this, to the things that I had done. So I guess what it did in terms of relationships, I found myself getting to know more and more people like me, other writers, other creators, other people who think like I do. And I think it actually improved my relationships in general because, you do tend to, many of my friends, my high school friends, are still buddies with each other, which is fine. But I never related to many of those people. And so I found people that I think I mentioned the science fiction club that I was in, a very eclectic group of people, but we had such great fun going to conventions and doing all of these weird things. We used to have a party every year that we called our Galactic Feast. And we would all dress up in our uniforms and costumes, and we would serve alien dishes. Okay, I don't know if you're familiar with the whole concept of tribbles in Star Trek. Tri-
No, I'm
Tribbles
not.
are little
Mm-mm.
fuzzy creatures that have no that it caused problems for. I would put it that way. Little fuzzy, lovable creatures that hate Klingons, and Klingons hate them. So I had a Klingon recipe for whole roasted tribble. Okay, and we did stuff. We had a great time. We would sit and we were watching bloopers from Star Trek, just having a great time. And I've totally gotten lost from the question you asked.
No, I was just seeing how it impacts your
Yeah,
relationships with others. You're writing, yeah.
yeah. Well,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. It impacted me by helping me find people that I could relate with, because there's a tendency, and again, a lot of people I know have never even moved more than 3 or 4 miles from where they were born. And they stay within their own little cluster of people because they're comfortable. I want to go out and meet somebody different, somebody new. You know, this writer, this I met another guy who did radio drama when I was doing mine, and he helped me produce The Day of the Martians. And it was fascinating. And some of these people I still have contact with.
So, what advice would you give yourself if you went back in time and spoke to your younger self?
If you don't, if you, I would have, if I could do it all over, as much as I love my alma mater, I think I would have gone to Columbia College instead of IIT, where I could have studied broadcasting, journalism, creative writing, video, filmmaking, because that's where my heart was. I went to IIT. The whole idea was to be a successful engineer, scientist, or whatever. But even when I was working in that field, I built a studio to do radio. For years, I have worked as a cable technician. I was a manager for a cable company. I got into computers, computer technician, manager of installations for computer systems, but I'm still writing science fiction novels. I'm still watching cartoons. I make my own trailer videos for my books. You know, that's where my heart is. And if I could have done anything different, I would have not listened to the counselors. I hope they're not listening to this. And I would have gone the route that I wanted to. I would have. I won't say that I didn't have a fulfilling life, but I it would be I would like to have done stuff like this more than fixing computers, if that makes sense.
It
One of
does.
the most exciting things I ever did. Are you familiar with WGN Radio here in Chicago, major radio station? And I had a chance to be interviewed by a gentleman named Rick Cogan. He is a very well-known um, columnist for the Chicago Tribune, and he has a Sunday night program on WGN, listened to by millions of people. He read the Chronicar and invited me to come in to do an audition, or no, to do an interview rather, and to be in a real radio studio with a real announcer and talking to I don't know how many thousands. It just blew my mind. That was one of the pinnacles of my life there, to be in the WGN studios. There's another station, WVON, the sort of the black counterpart, and I did a couple of programs there. Again, to really be in this. These are stations that I listened to when I was a kid, and now I am on the
Mhm.
air talking about my book.
Wow.
It's interesting. I never thought my life was that interesting until now, with some of these questions that you're asking and some of the things that you're pulling out of me here.
Well, like I say, it's the way you've lived your life. I think that's inspiring to me, and just yeah, maybe you not going to that maybe that could have been different. I think we all probably
Oh,
have
yeah.
some regrets with our with our past, but to me, it seems like it really didn't stop you from doing what you wanted to do.
No, you're right. It did.
Um,
I could have done it as a profession versus a hobby, but still, if I had, you talk about science and all of this, if I had become a radio announcer, the science in that would have been the hobby, if you follow my drift, because I still love that stuff. But my real heart was in media, broadcasting, writing, creative stuff. And and when the time came and I was able to get these things published, like I said, I went nuts. It took like 3 years to write the Chronicar between the research and the editing and finding a publisher. And then the next book took 18 months. The next one took 6 months, because now I have an outlet and all of these things really started to flow.
so you have five books. The first four were published by a company. Is that
Yep,
right? But the last one is self
right.
published.
Yeah, the first four were independent. The first one, the Chronicar, was published by a nonprofit independent publisher, and they did a hell of a job. I went through 3 rounds of editing. They hired an award-winning artist to do the cover. It was absolutely beautiful. And when they went out of business, I found another independent publisher who would take it over. And then the next 3 books were handled by that group. It's a group called Word Woos. And what was beautiful about them is that they not only published or republished the paperback and ebook, but they also produced an audiobook. So all of my novels are available as audiobooks. And the one that I self-published, Word Woos did just the audiobook for me. You know,
Yeah, for Chronicar, I read much of it, but I also listened to the audiobook version, and it was really
yeah,
well done.
he did a great job. And just to let people know that you can find a Chronicar in a library. And for people who don't want to spend, because I know there are people who, I don't know who this guy is. I don't want to give him, 12, $13. The Chronicars in the libraries across the country. There is are you familiar with something called Hoopla?
Hoopla, no
Hoopla
sir.
is a system that is tied to the public libraries like across the country. You sign up for Hoopla, get the app on your phone, use your library card to log into it, and you can borrow audiobooks, movies, ebooks. All of my novels are available on Hoopla for free. Oops, did I say that? But again, because my point is that I want people to read it. If they read the Chronicar for free, maybe they'll buy Time Waits for No One, which completes the story. Maybe they'll buy Edge of Perception, which is my paranormal science fiction love story, and that just gives it all away right there. You know, I've probably written the strangest variety of science fiction you've ever heard of.
Yeah, your latest book is called Lines of Force. Did it come out in 2024? Is
Yeah,
that
okay,
right?
yeah, last fall, Lines of Force: The End of the World as We Know It, and I've had people read it, and really, again, there's a lot of science in it, but I guess the way that I presented it is not so much that it scares people or bores them, because there's a lot of earth science and space science in it. There's a basically what's happening is that the lines of force are rogue magnetic anomalies that are coming out of the earth and causing all kinds of havoc. And the cause of it, they're not sure, but they think is one or a combination of 3 things. One, something going on in the earth's core where the magnetic field comes from. There is a comet with a strong magnetic field that's passing by. And then a concept that I've had people look up because they didn't understand it, something called electrosmog, which is all of the radio energy that's just out there on the planet. I mean, we're sitting here and, this is a Bluetooth enabled headset. It's a transmitter and it's putting out quote unquote electrosmog. This is my cell phone. Right now, it's broadcasting. As we're sitting here, I'm being impaled upon by radio signals from satellites and from TV broad. I mean, it's everywhere. There's a scene here where this scientist invents goggles that can see radio energy, and you can almost see nothing else because it's everywhere. But that's the idea behind Lines of Force. And then
and the whole thing is how they deal with it. My only request when people read my books, whether they pay for them, get them for free, or find them in the trash or whatever, is to write a review, is to go somewhere and say, hey, I liked it, or that I did like it. A bad review to me is almost as valuable as the good review, because and the bizarre thing is that most of the bad reviews are by people who didn't get it sometimes, which is maybe more of a clue to me that maybe I need to make it more clear. But some of my worst reviews were people who said, well, one guy read the Chronicar and said it was great, but I was expecting more history than science fiction. I never advertised it as a history book, you know. So
Right.
you were expecting something that I didn't advertise, but there it is.
If you could, write a letter to your readers 100 years into the future, what would you want it to say?
Oh my gosh, 4 words. Are you still here? Are you still
What do you mean
here?
by that?
Pardon me. I,
What do you mean by
well,
that?
where are we headed 100 years from now? We're either going to be in a Star Trek universe or we're going to be in a Mad Max universe. And I think there's no in between. It's very scary at the rate we're going right now. 100 years from now, I hope you are in a Star Trek type of universe. I hope that the world is there and that the dreams of Roddenberry and people like that have actually come true, and that people have learned to accept each other for whatever reason. The scary thing is that when you think about the Star Trek universe, that's something you have to work to achieve. But when you think of an apocalyptic thing like Mad Max, you fall into that, if you follow my drift. And we're doing a little bit of falling at the moment. That's very scary. And it takes work to get to one, and it takes apathy to fall into the other. So maybe the question might be, can you read this? That's a very interesting question. I may have to give you credit for my next science fiction novel.
I saw the wheels moving on that
Yeah.
one, and I was like, is he thinking of another book right now? So time travel is a big theme in your
Mhm.
work. If you could travel to the future or past, where and when would you travel to, and why?
Well, I think I had mentioned before in one of my novels, in Time Waits for No One, where the black character Tony is going back in time, ends up in the 1950s, and discovers, hey, that's not the time to be. He's actually he's actually in the South in the 50s, walking around thinking everything is okay. He goes to get a drink of water and doesn't see the whites only sign above, because he's naive. And in and talking to the scientist who invented the Chronicar, and he's saying, well, what's a safe time to go to? And he says there is no good time for a black person. So I don't know if there's any time in the past, except if I could go back and relive my youth and therefore make different changes that I would consider. But maybe back to about the time I was in college. In terms of the future, I have no idea what the future is going to be. Like I say, it could be this way or that way. If I could trust that it was going to be this way, almost any time in the future. If I thought we were going to have a Star Trek type of future, yeah, absolutely. But I don't really care to be, in a Mad Max world either. And at this point, I haven't a clue as to where the world would be 100 years from now. I mean, we look at the
Yeah,
technology. The
even
technology would be here, and even when I talk about things like I don't so much have a problem with the technology as how it is implemented. And that's the problem. The fact that I go to Facebook and I see a picture of a plane crash and then I realize it's an AI generated thing and it didn't really happen, that scares me.
there's so much. I remember when I was in college, the internet started coming
Mm-hmm.
out, and there was the thing called email,
Mm-hmm.
right? And look how far we've come in just 20, 25 years. It is just you can't really predict which way it's gonna go. It seems like.
Well, but I think you can sort of predict that there's always going to be those who misuse the technology. Because about the same time you're talking about there, I remember being sitting in a filling station, and one of my neighbors running up to me with a printout from an email. She was trying to warn everybody that the post office was going to start charging for email. And I'm saying that's a scam, that's a joke. It's not, but it was on the internet, and so everybody believed that until it didn't happen. So the hoaxes, the jokes, the falsehoods started way back then. In fact, it started before that. When I was doing research for the Chronicar, I would go to the Defender, which was a black newspaper, and I would go to one of the mainstream newspapers, totally different version of the same story. Which one do I believe?
Hmm.
In the book, the hero wanted to believe the black newspaper, but I know just as well that they would taint things in their direction as much as the other. So we've always been in a world where we use our technology to try to control how people think. And it's getting easier and easier to do so because we have people now who, instead of reading, they're watching YouTube videos. And if the YouTube video shows an alien flying around the Empire State Building, they're going to believe it. I think that's part of the reason why you're even asking me if I think time travel is real. Because there's been so much talk about it that people want to believe it. Or maybe there's some secret thing. No, there isn't. That kind of time travel, there's no way that could happen. Because if it could, we'd be in deep stuff. Because by now, somebody would have gone back and, that thing with the chip where we almost had World War III or whatever, somebody would have gone back and made sure that came true, So I think time travel is not possible, and thank God that it isn't.
Yeah, reading your book, you present a worrisome picture if it was possible.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'll give away a little bit of it. The whole reason, I enjoy like time travel and science fiction movies, but I've never read or saw a time travel story that dealt with time travel itself. Back to the Future is about Marty going back and keeping his parents from meeting or something like that, and the time machine is like going back and looking at how things have changed and all this, that, and the other. But traveling through time is just you get anything, you turn it on, and boom, you're there. Well, everything has consequences. Even my getting in my car and driving 10 miles down the road, there are consequences. I'm polluting the environment. I'm wearing down the parts of the car. If I make the wrong turn, I run into a wall and I kill myself. So time travel has got to have consequences. And that's part of what the story is about. I mean, there is an inherent danger in trying to travel through time. And the only way you could possibly change history is through the process that I go through in the book. I compare, I don't know how many millennials I'm going to lose here. I compare time travel to a reel of recording tape. So think about that as a reel of record that's being recorded as we experience it. Now, if I stop that tape, rewind it 3 days, and maybe go and I, shoot somebody, and then come back, there's going to be no change because I only changed that little piece of the tape, not what happened from there to here, if you follow my drift. The only way you can change time is the way it happens in the Chronicar. You travel back in time, you turn the machine off, and you have erased the future. And time restarts from that point. Now you can change history. But then there are a lot of things involved with that. Because in the Chronicar, traveling through the future is not possible because it doesn't exist. If the whole concept of causality, that things happen because other things happen. So the future only happens because of what you do in the present. So the future does not exist. You cannot go to the future. Which is why when you ask that question, I couldn't come up with an answer because I have no idea what the future is going to be.
Yeah, the book has some several shockers in there for the ending, like the last couple of chapters. you can't go back into the future, and then like the ending was it was
Yeah, a
memorable.
lot of people, and again, I thought the ending was just logical, but many people were completely blown away by the ending. So folks get it for the ending. And if you read it, don't give the ending away.
How do you want your life, not just your writing, to be
Oh, I
remembered?
just, I don't know, just somebody who tried to do the right thing and have fun with it. I mean, the reality is, I thought about it. This company that I worked for, I worked there for 13 years and, got to know a whole bunch of people. I've been retired for almost exactly a year. It'll be a year in a couple of weeks. And there were people there who will not remember who I was. There were people there who never knew me because they were hired after I left. One of the kind of bizarre things is that I did some training videos when I was there. Those are still running. They have there is a a line that you call for tech support, and I did the introduction. Hello, you have reached hit number 2 for this, and they're still using that. So there's that memory of me. But and unless I'm Stephen King or something, the only way people's gonna remember me is if they happen to dig up this podcast one day. And the reality is, when I'm gone, I'm gone. It won't make any difference to me. Hopefully, someone will read my books and get something out of them. Maybe they'll learn something from it. Maybe they'll enjoy it. Maybe they'll see this podcast and they'll be inspired to do something. But other than that, I never think about how I want to be remembered because it won't make any difference to me at the time. I'd rather have a positive memory than a negative one. But I mean, it's like worrying about what my classmates thought of me in 6th grade. But
No,
everyone's interested in having a legacy, and I think I already have a legacy in terms of my novels for whoever might happen to pick one up 100 years from now. But other than that, you know, if you remember me, he was a good guy and tried to do some good stuff.
I'm sure there's a lot of people around you that you may not even know who you've inspired and who have looked up to you and that you've had an influence on. And sometimes those around us can see that better than we can see ourselves.
Well, that's interesting because I've actually been fortunate enough to experience that a couple of times. I had a young man stop me on the street and thank me for a class that I taught in Microsoft Access years earlier, that helped him get a promotion in his job. And something even more bizarre, I got this Facebook message from a young lady who was asking me about something that I taught in Sunday school 40 years ago, and if I knew the book that I had gotten it from. She's now a pastor, and credits me partially with all of that. So, and I think about that, and that's wonderful. But again, once I'm gone, I won't know. So it is nice when you find out while you're still here. So those two things, I guess, if when you think about reviews, if for every one review I've got, there's 10 people who've read the book. So if 2 people come back and tell me I did something great, then there must be hundreds that I've helped that I'll never know about.
I listened to the audiobook and I left after I heard your comments on another interview. I went and I left a review. I never leave reviews. I never. It's just something I don't do. But I know that they say it helps. So I went and I left a review. So I completely agree with you. It's probably at least 10 or more.
Well, and
so Steve Bellinger, where can people learn more about you and where can your books be purchased?
the place I send everybody to is my website, stevebellinger.com. I was a webmaster once, and I learned that when you put everything in one place, that's how you find it. Go to stevebellinger.com. On the menu, click Steve's Books. All of my books are there. Every link to get to every version is there, and you can even order an autographed copy of my books. You can actually find out where the Chronicar is in libraries through my novel. So that's why I would send everybody.
Well, Steve, thanks for being on today. I had such a great time. I loved learning about you, and then I could bring you on here and ask you some specific questions because I was very curious about you as an author, you as a person, and thank you for being open with me and answering my questions. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, because you've asked questions that no one else has ever asked. Usually people just focus on the books or on the radio drama or whatever the theme is of the podcast. But you asked questions that forced me to think. And you may have given me an idea for another novel with one of your comments. Like I said, I'll have to give you a byline.
Sounds good. I'll take a signed copy. All right, Steve. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed this very much. Thank you.